Jaqueline Ess, Her Will and Testament, by Clive Barker. Read by Greg Blackman. My God, she thought, this can't be living. Day in, day out, the boredom, the drudgery, the frustration. My Christ, she prayed, let me out, set me free, crucify me if you must, but put me out of my misery. In lieu of his euthanasian benediction, she took a blade from Ben's razor, one dull day in late March, locked herself in the bathroom, and slit her wrists. Through the throbbing in her ears, she faintly heard Ben outside the bathroom door.
"Are you in there, darling?"
Go away, she thought she said.
"I'm back early, sweetheart. Traffic was light."
Please go away. The effort of trying to speak slid her off the toilet seat and onto the white tiled floor, where pools of her blood were already cooling.
"Darling?
Go.
Darling?
Away.
Are you all right?"
Now he's rattling at the door, the rat. Didn't he realise she couldn't open it? Wouldn't open it?
"Answer me, Jackie."
She groaned. She couldn't stop herself. The pain wasn't as terrible as she'd expected, but there was an ugly feeling, as though she'd been kicked in the head. Still, he couldn't catch her in time, not now, not even if he broke the door down. He broke the door down. She looked up at him through an air grown so thick with death you could have sliced it. Too late, she thought she said. But it wasn't. My God, she thought, this can't be suicide. I haven't died. The doctor Ben had hired for her was too perfectly benign. Only the best, he'd promised, only the very best for my Jackie. It's nothing, the doctor reassured her, that we can't put right with a little tinkering. Why doesn't he just come out with it, she thought. He doesn't give a damn. He doesn't know what it's like. I deal with a lot of these women's problems, he confided, fairly oozing a practised compassion. It's got to epidemic proportions among a certain age bracket. She was barely 30. What was he telling her? That she was prematurely menopausal? Depression, partial or total withdrawal, neuroses of every shape and size. You're not alone, believe me. Oh, yes, I am, she thought. I'm here, in my head, on my own, and you can't know what it's like. We'll have you right in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. I'm a lamb, am I? Does he think I'm a lamb? I know, he was saying now, what you've been through, and it's been traumatic. Women have certain needs. If they go unanswered, what would he know about women's needs? You're not a woman, she thought. What? He said. Had she spoken? She shook her head, denying speech. He went on, finding his rhythm once more. I'm not going to put you through interminable therapy sessions. You don't want that, do you? You want a little reassurance, and you want something to help you sleep at nights. He was irritating her badly now. His condescension was so profound it had no bottom. All-knowing, all-seeing father. That was his performance, as if he were blessed with some miraculous insight into the nature of a woman's soul. Of course, I've tried therapy courses with patients in the past, but between you and me, he lightly patted her hand, father's palm on the back of her hand. She was supposed to be flattered, reassured, maybe even seduced. Between you and me, it's so much talk. Endless talk. And frankly, what good does it do? We've all got problems. You can't talk them away, can you? You're not a woman. You don't look like a woman. You don't feel like a woman. Did you say something? She shook her head. I thought you said something. Please feel free to be honest with me. She didn't reply, and he seemed to tire of pretending intimacy. He stood up and went to the window. I think the best thing for you... He stood against the light, darkening the room, obscuring the view of the cherry trees on the lawn through the window. She stared at his wide shoulders, at his narrow hips, a fine figure of a man, as Ben would have called him. No child-bearer he, made to remake the world a body like that. If not the world, remaking minds would have to do. I think the best thing for you... What did he know with his hips, with his shoulders? He was too much a man to understand anything of her. I think the best thing for you would be a course of sedatives. Now her eyes were on his waist. And a holiday. Her mind had focused now on the body beneath the veneer of his clothes. The muscle, bone, and blood beneath the elastic skin. She pictured it from all sides, sizing it up, judging its powers of resistance. Then, closing on it, she thought, be a woman. Simply, as she thought that preposterous idea, it began to take shape. Not a fairy tale transformation, unfortunately. His flesh resisted such magic. She willed his manly chest into making breasts of itself, and it began to swell most fetchingly, until the skin burst and his sternum flew apart. His pelvis, teased to breaking point, fractured at its centre, unbalanced. He toppled over onto his desk, and from there stared up at her, his face yellow with shock. He licked his lips over and over again, to find some wetness to talk with. His mouth was dry. His words were stillborn. It was from between his legs that all the noise was coming, the splashing of his blood, the thud of his bowel on the carpet. She screamed at the absurd monstrosity she had made, and withdrew to the far corner of the room, where she was sick in the pot of the rubber plant. My God, she thought, this can't be murder. I didn't so much as touch him. What Jaqueline had done that afternoon, she kept to herself. No sense in giving people sleepless nights thinking about such peculiar talent. The police were very kind. They produced any number of explanations for the sudden departure of Dr. Blandish, though none quite described how his chest had erupted in that extraordinary fashion, making two handsome, if hairy, domes of his pectorals. It was assumed that some unknown psychotic, strong in his insanity, had broke in, done the deed with his hands, hammers and saws, and exited, locking the innocent Jaqueline Ess in an appalled silence no interrogation could hope to penetrate. Person or persons unknown had clearly dispatched the doctor to where neither sedatives nor therapy could help him. She almost forgot for a while, but as the months passed it came back to her by degrees, like a memory of a secret adultery. It teased her with its forbidden delights. She forgot the nausea and remembered the power. She forgot sordidity and remembered strength. She forgot the guilt that had seized her afterwards and longed to do it again. Only better. Jaqueline, is this my husband, she thought, actually calling me by my name? Usually it was Jackie, or Jack, or nothing at all. Jaqueline. He was looking at her with those big baby blues of his, like the college boy she'd loved at first sight. But his mouth was harder now, and his kisses tasted like stale bread. Jaqueline. Yes? I've got something I want to speak to you about. A conversation, she thought. It must be a public holiday. I don't know how to tell you this. Try me, she suggested. She knew that she could think his tongue into speaking if it pleased her, make him tell her what she wanted to hear. Words of love, maybe, if she could remember what they sounded like. But what was the use of that? Better the truth. Darling, I've gone off the rails a bit. What do you mean? She said. Have you, you bastard, she thought. It was while you weren't quite yourself. You know, when things had more or less stopped between us. Separate rooms. You wanted separate rooms, and I just went bananas with frustration. I didn't want to upset you, so I didn't say anything, but it's no use me trying to live two lives. You can have an affair if you want to, Ben. It's not an affair, Jackie. I love her. He was preparing one of his speeches. She could see it gathering momentum behind his teeth. The justifications that became accusations. Those excuses that always turned into assaults on her character. Once he got into full flow, there'd be no stopping him. She didn't want to hear. She's not like you at all, Jackie. She's frivolous in her way. I suppose you'd call her shallow. It might be worth interrupting here, she thought, before he ties himself in his usual knots. Well, she's not moody like you. You know, she's just a normal woman. I didn't mean to say you're not normal. You can't help having depressions, but she's not so sensitive. There's no need, Ben. No, damn it, I want it all to my chest. On to me, she thought. You never let me explain, he was saying. You've always given me one of those damn looks of yours, as if you wished I'd die, as if you wished I'd shut up. Shut up. You don't care how I feel, he was shouting now. Always in your own little world. Shut up, she thought. His mouth was open. She seemed to wish it closed, and with the thought, his jaws snapped together, severing the very tip of his pink tongue. It fell from between his lips and lodged in a fold of his shirt. Shut up, she thought again. The two perfect regiments of his teeth ground down into each other, cracking and splitting, nerve, calcium and spit making a pinkish foam on his chin, as his mouth collapsed inwards. Shut up, she was still thinking, as his startled baby blues sank back into his skull and his nose wormed its way into his brain. He was not Ben any longer. He was a man with a red lizard's head, flattening, battening down upon itself, and, thank God, he was past speech-making, once and for all. Now she had the knack of it, she began to take pleasure in the changes she was willing upon him. She flipped him head over heels onto the floor, and began to compress his arms and legs, telescoping flesh and resistant bone into a smaller and yet smaller space. His clothes were folded inwards, and the tissue of his stomach was plucked from his neatly packaged entrails and stretched around his body to wrap him up. His fingers were poking from his shoulder blades now, and his feet, still thrashing with fury, were tripped up in his gut. She turned him over one final time to pressurize his spine into a foot-long column of muck, and that was about the end of it. As she came out of her ecstasy, she saw Ben sitting on the floor, shut up into a space about the size of one of his fine leather suitcases, while blood, bile, and lymphatic fluid pulsed weakly from his hushed body. My God, she thought, this can't be my husband. He's never been as tidy as that. This time, she didn't wait for help. This time she knew what she'd done, guessed even how she'd done it, and she accepted her crime for the too rough justice it was. She packed her bags and left the home. I'm alive, she thought. For the first time in my whole wretched life, I'm alive. Vassie's Testimony, Part 1. To you who dream of sweet, strong women, I leave this story. It is a promise, as surely as it is a confession, as surely as it's the last words of a lost man who wanted nothing but to love and be loved. I sit here, trembling, waiting for the night, waiting for that whining pimp coos to come to my door again and take everything I own from me in exchange for the key to her room. I am not a courageous man, and I never have been, so I'm afraid of what might happen to me tonight. But I cannot go through life dreaming all the time, existing through the darkness on only a glimpse of heaven. Sooner or later one has to gird one's loins, that's appropriate, and get up and find it, even if it means giving away the world in exchange. I probably make no sense. You're thinking, you who chanced on this testimony, you're thinking, who was he, this imbecile? My name was Oliver Vassie. I am now 38 years old. I was a lawyer until a year or more ago, when I began the search that ends tonight with that pimp and that key and that holy of holies. But the story begins more than a year ago. It is many years since Jaqueline Ess first came to me. She arrived out of the blue at my offices, claiming to be the widow of a friend of mine from law school, one Benjamin S. And when I thought back, I remembered the face. A mutual friend who'd been at the wedding had shown me a photograph of Ben and his blushing bride. And here she was, every bit as elusive a beauty as her photograph had promised. I remember being acutely embarrassed at that first interview. She'd arrived at a busy time and I was up to my neck in work. But I was so enthralled by her. I let all the day's interviews fall by the wayside, and when my secretary came in, she gave me one of her steely glances, as if to throw a bucket of cold water over me. I suppose I was enamoured from the start, and she sensed the electric atmosphere in my office. Me, I pretended I was merely being polite to the widow of an old friend. I didn't like to think about passion. It wasn't a part of my nature. Or so I thought. How little we know, really know, about our capabilities. Jaqueline told me lies at that first meeting, about how Ben had died of cancer, of how often he had spoken of me and how fondly. I suppose she could have told me the truth then and there and I would have lapped it up. I believe I was utterly devoted from the beginning. But it's difficult to remember quite how and when interest in another human being flares into something more committed, more passionate. It may be that I'm inventing the impact she had on me at that first meeting, simply reinventing history to justify my later excesses. I'm not sure. Anyway, wherever and whenever it happened, however quickly or slowly, I succumbed to her, and the affair began. I'm not a particularly inquisitive man when my friends or my bed partners are concerned. As a lawyer, one spends one's time going through the dirt of other people's lives, and frankly, 8 hours a day of that is quite enough for me. When I'm out of the office, my pleasure is in letting people be. I don't pry, I don't dig, I just take them on face value. Jaqueline was no exception to this rule. She was a woman I was glad to have in my life, whatever the truth of her past. She possessed a marvellous sang-froid. She was witty, bawdy, oblique. I'd never met a more enchanting woman. It was none of my business how she lived with Ben, what the marriage had been like, etc., etc. That was her history. I was happy to live in the present and let the past die its own death. I think I even flattered myself that whatever pain she'd experienced, I could help her forget it. Certainly her stories had holes in them. As a lawyer, I was trained to be eagle-eyed where fabrications were concerned. And however much I tried to put my perceptions aside, I sensed that she wasn't quite coming clean with me. But everyone has secrets. I knew that. Let her have hers, I thought. Only once did I challenge her on a detail of her pretended life story. In talking about Ben's death, she let slip that he'd got what he deserved, and I asked her what she meant. She smiled, that Gioconda smile of hers, and told me that she felt there was a balance to be redressed between men and women. I let the observation pass. After all, I was obsessed by that time, past all hope of salvation. Whatever argument she was putting, I was happy to concede it. She was so beautiful, you see, not in any two-dimensional sense. She wasn't young, she wasn't innocent, she didn't have that pristine symmetry so favoured by ad men and photographers. Her face was plainly that of a woman in her early 40s. It had been used to laugh and cry, and usage leaves its marks. But she had a power to transform herself in the subtlest way, making that face as various as the sky. Early on, I thought it was a make-up trick, but as we slept together more and more, I watched her in the mornings, sleep in her eyes, and in the evenings, heavy with fatigue, I soon realised that she wore nothing on her skull but flesh and blood. What transformed her was internal. It was a trick of the will. And do you know, that made me love her all the more. Then, one night, I woke with her sleeping beside me. We slept often on the floor, which she preferred to the bed. Beds, she said, reminded her of marriage. Anyway, that night she was lying under a quilt on the carpet of my room, and I, simply out of adoration, was watching her face in sleep. If one has given oneself utterly, watching the beloved sleep can be a vile experience. Perhaps some of you have known that paralysis, staring down at features closed to your inquiry, locked away from you where you can never ever go, into the other's mind. As I say, for us who have given ourselves, that is a horror. One knows in those moments that one does not exist except in relation to that face, that personality. Therefore, when that face is closed down, that personality is lost in its own unknowable world. One feels completely without purpose. A planet without a sun, revolving in darkness. That's how I felt that night, looking down at her extraordinary features, and as I chewed on my soullessness, her face began to alter. She was clearly dreaming. But what dreams must she have been having? Her very fabric was on the move, her muscle, her hair, the down on her cheek moving to the dictates of some internal tide. Her lips bloomed from her bone, boiling up into a slavering tower of skin. Her hair swirled around her head as though she were lying in water. The substance of her cheeks formed furrows and ridges like the ritual scars on a warrior, inflamed and throbbing patterns of tissue, swelling up and changing again even as the pattern formed. This fluctuation was a terror to me. I must have made some noise. She didn't wake, but came a little closer to the surface of sleep, leaving the deeper waters where these powers were sourced. The patterns sank away in an instant, and her face was again that of a gently sleeping woman. That was, you can understand, a pivotal experience, even though I spent the next few days trying to convince myself that I hadn't seen it. The effort was useless. I knew there was something wrong with her, and at the same time I was certain she knew nothing about it. I was convinced that something in her system was awry, and that I was best to investigate her history before I told her what I'd seen. Now, on reflection, of course, that seems laughably naive to think she wouldn't have known that she contained such a power, but it was easier for me to picture her as prey to such skill than mistress of it. That's a man speaking of a woman, not just me, Oliver Vassie, of her Jaqueline Ess. We cannot believe, we men, that power will ever reside happily in the body of a woman, unless that power is a male child. Not true power. The power must be in male hands, God-given. That's what our fathers tell us. Idiots that they are. Anyway, I investigated Jaqueline as surreptitiously as I could. I had a contact in York where the couple had lived, and it wasn't difficult to get some inquiries moving. It took a week for my contact to get back to me because he'd had to cut through a good deal of shit from the police to get a hint of the truth, but the news came, and it was bad. Ben was dead, that much was true, but there was no way he'd died of cancer. My contact had only got the vaguest clues as to the condition of Ben's corpse, but he gathered it had been spectacularly mutilated. And the prime suspect, my beloved Jaqueline Ess. The same innocent woman who was occupying my flat, sleeping by my side every night. So I put it to her that she was hiding something from me. I didn't know what I was expecting in return. What I got was a demonstration of her power. She gave it freely, without malice, but I would have been a fool not to have read a warning into it. She told me, first, how she had discovered her unique control over the sum and substance of human beings. In her despair, she said, when she was on the verge of killing herself, she had found in the very deep water trenches of her nature faculties she had never known existed, powers which came up out of those regions as she recovered like fish to the light. Then she showed me the smallest measure of these powers, plucking hairs from my head, one by one. Only a dozen, just to demonstrate her formidable skills. I felt them going. She just said, "One from behind your ear," and I'd feel my skin creep and then jump as fingers of her volition snatched a hair out, and then another and another. It was an incredible display. She had this power down to a fine art, locating and withdrawing single hairs from my scalp with the precision of tweezers. Frankly, I was sitting there rigid with fear, knowing that she was just toying with me. Sooner or later, I was certain that the time would be right for her to silence me permanently. But she had doubts about herself. She told me how the skill, though she had honed it, scared her. She needed, she said, someone to teach her how to use it best, and I was not that somebody. I was just a man who loved her, who had loved her before this revelation, and would love her still, in spite of it. In fact, after that display, I quickly came to accommodate a new vision of Jaqueline. Instead of fearing her, I became more devoted to this woman who tolerated my possession of her body. My work became an irritation, a distraction that came between me and thinking of my beloved. What reputation I had began to deteriorate. I lost briefs, I lost credibility. In the space of 2 or 3 months, my professional life dwindled away to almost nothing. Friends despaired of me, colleagues avoided me. It wasn't that she was feeding on me. I want to be clear about that. She was no Lamia, no succubus. What happened to me, my fall from grace with ordinary life, if you like, was of my own making. She didn't bewitch me. That's a romantic lie to excuse rape. She was a sea, and I had to swim in her. Does that make any sense? I'd lived my life on the shore, in the solid world of law, and I was tired of it. She was liquid, a boundless sea in a single body, a deluge in a small room, and I will gladly drown in her if she grants me the chance. But that was my decision. Understand that. This has always been my decision. I have decided to go to the room tonight and be with her one final time. That is of my own free will. And what man would not? She is, sublime. For a month after that demonstration of power, I lived in a permanent ecstasy of her. When I was with her, she showed me ways to love beyond the limits of any other creature on God's earth. I say beyond the limits with her, there were no limits. And when I was away from her, the reverie continued, because she seemed to have changed my world. Then she left me. I knew why. She'd gone to find someone to teach her how to use strength, but understanding her reasons made it no easier. I broke down, I lost my job, lost my identity, lost the few friends I had left in the world. I scarcely noticed. There were minor losses, beside the loss of Jaqueline. Jaqueline! My God, she thought, can this really be the most influential man in the country? He looked so unprepossessing, so very unspectacular. His chin wasn't even strong. But Titus Pettifer was power. He ran more monopolies than he could count. His word in the financial world could break companies like sticks, destroying the ambitions of hundreds, the careers of thousands. Fortunes were made overnight in his shadow. Entire corporations fell when he blew on them, casualties of his whim. This man knew power, if any man knew it. He had to be learned from. You wouldn't mind if I called you Jay, would you? No. Have you been waiting long? Long enough. I don't normally leave beautiful women waiting. Yes, you do. She knew him already. 2 minutes in his presence was enough to find his measure. He would come quickest to her if she was quietly insolent. Do you always call women you've never met before by their initials? It's convenient for filing. Do you mind? It depends. On what? What I get in return for giving you the privilege. It's a privilege, is it, to know your name? Yes. Well, I'm flattered. Unless, of course, you grant that privilege widely. She shook her head. No. He could see she wasn't profligate with her affections. Why have you waited so long to see me? He said. Why have I had reports of your wearing my secretaries down with your constant demands to meet with me? Do you want money? Because if you do, you'll go away empty-handed. I became rich by being mean, and the richer I get, the meaner I become. The remark was truth. He spoke it plainly. I don't want money, she said, equally plainly. That's refreshing. There's richer than you. He raised his eyebrows in surprise. She could bite, this beauty. True, he said. There were at least 6 richer men in the hemisphere. I'm not an adoring little nobody. I haven't come here to screw a name. I've come here because we can be together. We have a great deal to offer each other. Such as? He said. I have my body. He smiled. It was the straightest offer he'd heard in years. And what do I offer you in return for such largesse? I want to learn. Learn how to use power. She was stranger and stranger, this one. What do you mean? He replied, playing for time. He hadn't got the measure of her. She vexed him, confounded him. Shall I recite it for you again in bourgeoisie? She said, playing insolence with such a smile he almost felt attractive again. No need. You want to learn to use power. I suppose I could teach you. I know you can. You realize I'm a married man. Virginia and I have been together 18 years. You have 3 sons, 4 horses, a maidservant called Mirabelle. You loathe New York and you love Bangkok. Your shirt collar is 16.5. Your favourite colour is green. Turquoise. You're getting subtler in your old age. I'm not old. 18 years a married man, it ages you prematurely. Not me. Prove it. How? Take me. What? Take me. Here? Draw the blinds, lock the door, turn off the computer terminus, and take me. I dare you. Dare? How long was it since anyone had dared him to do anything? Dare? He was excited. He hadn't been so excited in a dozen years. He drew the blinds, locked the door, turned off the video display of his fortunes. My God, she thought. I've got him. It wasn't an easy passion, not like that with Vassie. For one thing, Pettifer was a clumsy, uncultured lover. For another, he was too nervous of his wife to be a wholly successful adulterer. He thought he saw Virginia everywhere, in the lobbies of the hotels they took a room in for the afternoon, in cabs cruising the street outside their rendezvous. Once, even, he swore the likeness was exact, dressed as a waitress and swabbing down a table in a restaurant. All fictional fears, but they dampened the spontaneity of the romance somewhat. Still, she was learning from him. He was as brilliant a potentate as he was inept a lover. She learned how to be powerful without exercising power, how to keep oneself uncontaminated by the foulness all charisma stirs up in the uncharismatic, how to make the plain decisions plainly, how to be merciless. Not that she needed much education in that particular quarter. Perhaps it was more truthful to say he taught her never to regret her absence of instinctive compassion, but to judge with her intellect alone who deserved extinction and who might be numbered among the righteous. Not once did she show herself to him, although she used her skills in the most secret of ways to tease pleasure out of his stale nerves. In the 4th week of their affair, they were lying side by side in a lilac room while the mid-afternoon traffic growled in the street below. It had been a bad bout of sex. He was nervous and no tricks would coax him out of himself. It was over quickly, almost without heat. He was going to tell her something. She knew it. It was waiting, this revelation, somewhere at the back of his throat. Turning to him, she massaged his temples with her mind and soothed him into speech. He was about to spoil the day. He was about to spoil his career. He was about, God help him, to spoil his life. "I have to stop seeing you," he said. He wouldn't dare, she thought. "I'm not sure what I know about you, or rather what I think I know about you, but it makes me cautious of you. Jay, do you understand?" "No." "I'm afraid I suspect you of crimes." "Crimes?" "You have a history." "Who's been rooting?" she asked. "Surely not Virginia." "No, not Virginia. She's beyond curiosity." "Who then?" "It's not your business." "Who?" She pressed lightly on his temples. It hurt him and he winced. "What's wrong?" she asked. "My head's aching." "Tension, that's all. Just tension. I can take it away, Titus." She touched her fingers to his forehead, relaxing her hold of him. He sighed as relief came. "Is that better?" "Oh, yes." "Who's been snooping, Titus?" "I have a personal secretary, Lyndon. You've heard me speak of him. He knew about our relationship from the beginning. Indeed, he books the hotels, arranges my cover stories for Virginia." There was a sort of boyishness in this speech that was rather touching, as though he was embarrassed to leave her rather than heartbroken. "Lyndon's quite a miracle worker. He's manoeuvred a lot of things to make it easier between us, so he's got nothing against you. It's just that he happens to see one of the photographs I take of you." Boop! "He's got nothing against you. It's just that he happened to see one of the photographs I took of you. I gave them to him to shred." "Why?" "I shouldn't have taken them. It was a mistake. Virginia might have..." He paused, began again. "Anyhow, he recognised you, although he couldn't remember exactly where he'd seen you before." "But he remembered eventually." "He used to work for one of my newspapers as a gossip columnist. That's how he came to be my personal assistant. He remembered you from your previous incarnation, as it were. Jaqueline Ess, the wife of Benjamin Ess, deceased." "Deceased?" "He brought me some other photographs. Not as pretty as the ones of you." "Photographs of what?" "Your home. And the body of your husband. They said it was a body, though in God's name there was precious little human being left in it." "There was precious little to start with," she said simply, thinking of Ben's cold eyes and colder hands, fit only to be shut up and forgotten. "What happened?" "To Ben? He was killed." "How?" Did his voice waver a little? "Very easily," she said. She had risen from the bed and was standing by the window. Strong summer light carved its way through the slats of the blind, ridges of shadow and sunlight charting the contours of her face. "You did it?" "Yes." He had taught her to be plain. "Yes, I did it." He had taught her an economy of threat too. "Leave me, and I'll do the same again." He shook his head. "Never. You wouldn't dare." He was standing in front of her now. "We must understand each other, Jay. I am powerful and I am pure. Do you see? My public face isn't even touched by a glimmer of scandal. I could afford a mistress, a dozen mistresses to be revealed, but a murderess, no, that would spoil my life." "Is he blackmailing you, this Lyndon?" He stared at the day through the blinds with a crippled look on his face. There was a twitch in the nerves of his cheek under his left eye. "Yes, if you must know," he said, in a dead voice. "The bastard has me for all I'm worth." "I see." "And if he can guess, then so can others, you understand?" "I'm strong. You're strong. We can twist them around our little fingers." "No." "Yes. I have skills, Titus." "I don't want to know. You will know, she said. She looked at him, taking hold of his hands without touching him. He watched, all astonished eyes, as his unwilling hands were raised to touch her face, to stroke her hair with the fondest of gestures. She made him run his trembling fingers across her breasts, taking them with more ardour than he could summon on his own initiative. "You are always too tentative, Titus," she said, making him paw her almost to the point of bruising. "This is how I like it." Now his hands were lower, fetching out a different look from her face. Tides were moving over it. She was all alive. Deeper. His finger intruded, his thumb stroked. "I like that, Titus. Why can't you do that without me demanding?" He blushed. He didn't like to talk about what they did together. She coaxed him deeper, whispering, "I won't break, you know. Virginia may be Dresden China, I'm not. I want feeling. I want something that I can remember you by when I'm not with you. Nothing is everlasting, is it? But I want something to keep me warm through the night." He was sinking to his knees, his hands kept by her design, on her and in her, still roving like two lustful crabs. His body was awash with sweat. It was, she thought, the first time she'd ever seen him sweat. "Don't kill me," he whimpered. "I could wipe you out." Wipe, she thought, then put the image out of her mind before she did him some harm. I know, he said. You can kill me easily." He was crying. My God, she thought, the great man is at my feet sobbing like a baby. What can I learn of power from this puerile performance? She plucked the tears off his cheeks, using rather more strength than the task required. His skin reddened under her gaze. "Let me be, Jay. I can't help you. I'm useless to you." It was true. He was absolutely useless. Contemptuously, she let his hands go. They fell limply by his sides. "Don't ever try and find me, Titus. You understand? Don't ever send your minions after me to preserve your reputation, because I will be more merciless than you've ever been." He said nothing, just knelt there, facing the window, while she washed her face, drank the coffee they'd ordered, and left. Lyndon was surprised to find the door of his office ajar. It was only 7:36. None of the secretaries would be in for another hour. Clearly one of the cleaners had been remiss leaving the door unlocked. He'd find out who. Sacker. He pushed the door open. Jaqueline was sitting with her back to the door. He recognised the back of her head, that fall of auburn hair. A sluttish display, too teased, too wild. His office, an annex to Mr. Pettifer's, was kept meticulously ordered. He glanced over it. Everything seemed to be in place. "What are you doing here?" She took a little breath, preparing herself. This was the first time she had planned to do it. Before, it had been a spur-of-the-moment decision. He was approaching the desk and putting down his briefcase and his neatly folded copy of the Financial Times. "You have no right to come in here without my permission," he said. She turned on the lazy swivel of his chair, the way he did when he had people in to discipline. "Lyndon," she said. "Nothing you can say or do will change the facts, Mrs. S," he said, saving her the trouble of introducing the subject. "You are a cold-blooded killer. It was my bound duty to inform Mr. Pettifer of the situation." "You did it for the good of Titus." "Of course." "And the blackmail? That was also for the good of Titus, was it?" "Get out of my office." "Was it, Lyndon?" "You're a whore. Whores know nothing. They are ignorant, diseased animals," he spat. "Oh, you're cunning, I'll grant you that, and then so's any slut with a living to make." She stood up. He expected a riposte. He got none, at least not verbally. But he felt a tauntness across his face, as though someone was pressing on it. "What are you doing?" he said. "Doing?" His eyes were being forced into slits, like a child imitating a monstrous oriental. His mouth was hauled wide and tight, his smile brilliant. The words were difficult to say. "Stop it!" She shook her head. "Ha!" he said again, still defying her. She just stared at him. His face was beginning to jerk and twitch under the pressure, the muscles going into spasm. "Please," he tried to say, "if you lay a finger on me." "I won't," she said, and pressed home her advantage. Beneath his clothes he felt the same tension all over his body, pulling his skin, drawing him tighter and tighter. Something was going to give, he knew it. Some part of him would be weak and tear under this relentless assault. And if he once began to break open, nothing would prevent her ripping him apart. He worked all this out quite coolly while his body twitched and he swore at her through his enforced grin. "Cunt!" he said. "Syphilitic cunt!" He didn't seem to be afraid, she thought. In extremis, she just... boop! He didn't seem to be afraid, she thought. In extremis, he just unleashed so much hatred of her, the fear was entirely elapsed. Now he was calling her a whore again, though his face was distorted almost beyond recognition. And then he began to split. The tear began at the bridge of his nose and ran up across his brow and down, bisecting his lips and his chin, and then his neck and his chest. In a matter of seconds his shirt was dyed red, his dark suit darkening further, his cuffs and trouser legs pouring blood. The skin flew off his hands like gloves off a surgeon, and 2 rings of scarlet tissue lolled down to either side of his flayed face like the ears of an elephant. His name-calling had stopped. He had been dead of shock now for 10 seconds, though she was still working him over vengefully, tugging his skin off his body and flinging the scraps around the room until at last he stood, steaming in his red suit and his red shirt and his shiny red shoes, and looked, to her eyes, a little more like a sensitive man. Content with the effect, she released him. He lay down quietly in a blood puddle and slept. My God, she thought, as she calmly took the stairs out the back way. That was murder in the first degree. She saw no reports of the death in any of the papers and nothing on the news bulletins. Lyndon had apparently died as he had lived, hidden from public view. But she knew wheels, so big their hubs could not be seen by insignificant individuals like ourselves, would be moving. What they would do, how they would change her life, she could only guess at. But the murder of Lyndon had not simply been spite, though that had been a part of it. No, she'd also wanted to stir them up, her enemies in the world, and bring them after her. Let them show their hands, let them show their contempt, their terror. She'd gone through her life, it seemed, looking for a sign of herself, only able to define her nature by the look in others' eyes. Now she wanted an end to that. It was time to deal with her pursuers. Surely now everyone who had seen her, Pettifer first, then Vassie, would come after her, and she would close their eyes permanently, make them forgetful of her. Only then, the witnesses destroyed, would she be free. Pettifer didn't come, of course, not in person. It was easy for him to find agents, men without scruple or compassion, but with a nose for pursuit that would shame a bloodhound. A trap was being laid for her, though she couldn't yet see its jaws. There were signs of it everywhere. An eruption of birds from behind a wall, a peculiar light from a distant window, footsteps, whistles, dark-suited men reading the news at the limit of her vision. As the weeks passed, they didn't come closer to her, but neither did they go away. They waited, like cats in a tree, their tails twitching, their eyes lazy. But the pursuit had Pettifer's mark. She'd learned enough from him to recognise his circumspection and his guile. They would come for her eventually, not in her time, but in theirs. Perhaps not even in theirs, in his. And though she never saw his face, it was as though Titus was on her heels personally. My God, she thought, I'm in danger of my life, and I don't care. It was useless, this power over flesh, if it had no direction behind it. She had used it for her own petty reasons, for the gratification of nervous pleasure and sheer anger. But these displays hadn't brought her any closer to other people, they just made her a freak in their eyes. Sometimes she thought of Vassie and wondered where he was, what he was doing. He hadn't been a strong man, but he'd had a little passion in his soul, more than Ben, more than Pettifer, certainly more than Lyndon. And she remembered fondly he was the only man she'd ever known who had called her Jaqueline. All the rest had manufactured unendearing corruptions of her name, Jackie or Jay, or in Ben's more irritating moods, Juju. Only Vassie had called her Jaqueline, plain and simple, accepting in his formal way the completeness of her, the totality of her. And when she thought of him, tried to picture how he might return to her, she feared for him. Vassie's Testimony, Part 2. Of course I searched for her. It's only when you've lost someone you realise the nonsense of that phrase, it's a small world. It isn't. It's a vast, devouring world, especially if you're alone. When I was a lawyer, locked in that incestuous coterie, I used to see the same faces day after day. Some I'd exchange words with, some smiles, some nods. We belonged, even if we were enemies at the bar, to the same complacent circle. We ate at the same tables. We drank elbow to elbow. We even shared mistresses, though we didn't always know it at the time. In such circumstances, it's easy to believe the world means you no harm. Certainly, you grow older, but then so does everyone else. You even believe in your self-satisfied way that the passage of years makes you a little wiser. Life is bearable. Even the 3 a.m. sweats come more infrequently as the bank balance swells. But to think that the world is harmless is to lie to yourself, to believe in so-called certainties that are, in fact, simply shared delusions. When she left, all the delusions fell away, and all the lies I had assiduously lived by became strikingly apparent. It's not a small world, when there's only one face in it you can bear to look upon. That face is lost somewhere in a maelstrom. It's not a small world when the few vital memories of your object of affection are in danger of being trampled out by the thousands of moments that assail you every day like children tugging at you, demanding your sole attention. I was a broken man. I would find myself, there's an apt phrase, sleeping in tiny bedrooms in forlorn hotels, drinking more often than eating, and writing her name like a classic obsessive over and over again, on the walls, on the pillow, on the palm of my hand. I broke the skin of my palm with my pen, and the ink infected it. The mark's still there. I'm looking at it now. Jaqueline, it says. Jaqueline. Then, one day, entirely by chance, I saw her. It sounds melodramatic, but I thought I was going to die at that moment. I'd imagined her for so long, keyed myself up for seeing her again, that when it happened I felt my limbs weaken and I was sick in the middle of the street. Not a classic reunion. The lover on seeing his beloved throws up down his shirt, but then nothing that happened between Jaqueline and myself was ever quite normal or natural. I followed her, which was difficult. There were crowds and she was walking fast. I didn't know whether to call out her name or not. I decided not. What would she have done anyway, seeing this unshaven lunatic shambling towards her, calling her name? She'd have run, probably. Or worse, she would have reached into my chest, seizing my heart in her will, and put me out of my misery before I could reveal her to the world. So I was silent and simply followed her doggedly to what I assumed was her apartment. And I stayed there, or in the vicinity, for the next 2.5 days, not quite knowing what to do. It was a ridiculous dilemma after all this time of watching for her, now that she was within speaking distance, touching distance. I didn't dare approach. Maybe I feared death. But then here I am, in this stinking room in Amsterdam, setting my testimony down and waiting for Coos to bring me her key, and I don't fear death now. Probably it was my vanity that prevented me from approaching her. I didn't want her to see me cracked and desolate. I wanted to come to her clean, her dream lover. And while I waited, they came for her. I don't know who they were. 2 men, plainly dressed. I don't think policemen too smooth, cultured even, and she didn't resist. She went smilingly as if to the opera. At the first opportunity I returned to the building a little better dressed, located her apartment from the porter and broke in. She'd been living plainly. In one corner of the room she had set up a table and had been writing her memoirs. I sat down and read and eventually took the pages away with me. She'd got no further than the first 7 years of her life. I wondered, again, in my vanity, if I would have been chronicled in the book. Probably not. I took some of her clothes too, only items she had worn when I know her, and nothing intimate. I'm not a fetishist. I wasn't going to go home and bury my face in the smell of her underwear, but I wanted something to remember her by, to picture her in. Though on reflection I never met any human being more fitted to dress purely in her skin. So I lost her a second time. All the fault of my own cowardice and circumstance. Pettifer didn't come near the house they were keeping Mrs. S in for 4 weeks. She was given more or less everything she asked for except her freedom, and she only asked for that in the most abstracted fashion. She wasn't interested in escape, though it would have been easy to achieve. Once or twice she wondered if Titus had told the 2 men and the woman who were keeping her a prisoner in the house exactly what she was capable of. She guessed not. They treated her as though she were simply a woman Titus had set eyes on and desired. They had procured her for his bed, simple as that. With a room to herself and an endless supply of paper, she began to write her memoirs again, from the beginning. It was late summer and the nights were getting chilly. Sometimes, to warm herself, she would lie on the floor. She'd ask them to remove the bed, and will her body to ripple like the surface of a lake. Her body without sex became a mystery to her again, and she realized for the first time that physical love had been an exploration of that most intimate yet most unknown region of her being, her flesh. She had understood herself best embracing someone else, seen her own substance clearly only when another's lips were laid upon it, adoring and gentle. She thought of Vassie again, and the lake at the thought of him was roused as if by a tempest. Her breasts shook into curling mountains. Her belly ran with extraordinary tides. Currents crossed and recrossed her flickering face, lapping at her mouth and leaving their mark like waves on sand. As she was fluid in his memory, so as she remembered him, she liquefied. She thought of the few times she had been at peace in her life, and physical love, discharging ambition and vanity, had always preceded those fragile moments. There were other ways, presumably, but her experience had been limited. Her mother had always said that women, being more at peace with themselves than men, needed fewer distractions from their hurts. But she'd not found it like that at all. She'd found her life full of hurts, but almost empty of ways to salve them. She left off writing her memoirs when she came to her 9th year. She despaired of telling her story from that point on, with the first realization of oncoming puberty. She burnt the papers on a bonfire she lit in the middle of her room, the day that Pettifer arrived. My God, she thought, this can't be power. Pettifer looked sick, as physically changed as a friend she'd lost to cancer. 1 month seemingly healthy, the next sucked up from the inside, self-devoured. He looked like a husk of a man, his skin grey and mottled. Only his eyes glittered, and those like the eyes of a mad dog. He was dressed immaculately, as though for a wedding. Jay. Titus. He looked her up and down. Are you well? Thank you, yes. They give you everything you ask for? Perfect hosts. You haven't resisted? Resisted? Being here, locked up, I was prepared after Lyndon for another slaughter of the innocents. Lyndon was not innocent, Titus. These people are. You didn't tell them. I didn't deem it necessary. May I close the door? He was her captor, but he came like an emissary to the camp of a greater power. She liked the way he was with her, cowed but elated. He closed the door and locked it. I love you, Jay. And I fear you. In fact, I think I love you because I fear you. Is that a sickness? I would have thought so. Yes. So would I. Why did you take such a time to come? I had to put my affairs in order, otherwise there would have been chaos when I was gone. You're leaving? He looked into her, the muscles of his face ruffled by anticipation. I hope so. Where to? Still, she didn't guess what had brought him to this house. His affairs neatened, his wife unknowingly asked forgiveness of as she slept. All channels of escape closed, all contradictions laid to rest. Still, she didn't guess he'd come to die. I'm reduced by you, Jay, reduced to nothing, and there is nowhere for me to go. Do you follow? No. I cannot live without you, he said. The cliché was unpardonable. Could he not have found a better way to say it? She almost laughed, it was so trite. But he hadn't finished. And I certainly can't live with you. Abruptly the tone changed. Because you revolt me, woman. Your whole being disgusts me. So? She asked softly. So? He was tender again, and she began to understand. Kill me. It was grotesque. The glittering eyes were steady on her. It's what I want, he said. Believe me, it's all I want in the world. Kill me however you please. I'll go without resistance, without complaint. She remembered the old joke. Masochist to sadist. Hurt me, for God's sake, hurt me. Sadist to masochist. No. And if I refuse, she said. You can't refuse. I'm loathsome. But I don't hate you, Titus. Well, you should. I'm weak. I'm useless to you. I taught you nothing. You taught me a great deal. I can control myself now. Well, Lyndon's death was controlled, was it? Certainly. It looked a little excessive to me. He got everything he deserved. Give me what I deserve, then. In my turn, I locked you up. I've rejected you when you needed me. Punish me for it. I survived. Jay! Even in his extremity, he couldn't call her by her full name. Please to God, I need only this one thing from you. Do it out of whatever motive you have in you, compassion or contempt or love, but do it, please, do it. No, she said. He crossed the room suddenly and slapped her very hard. Lyndon said you were a whore. He was right. You are. Gutter slut. Nothing better. He walked away, turned, walked back, hit her again. Faster, harder, and again, 6 or 7 times, backwards and forwards. Then he stopped, panting. You want money? Bargains now. Blows, then bargains. She was seeing him twisted through tears of shock, which she was unable to prevent. Do you want money? He said again. What do you think? He didn't hear her sarcasm and began to scatter notes around her feet, dozens and dozens of them, like offerings around the statue of the Virgin. Anything you want, he said. Jaqueline! In her belly, she felt something close to pain as the urge to kill him found birth, but she resisted it. It was playing into his hands, becoming the instrument of his will, powerless. Usage, again, that's all she ever got. She had been bred like a cow to give a certain supply, of care to husbands, of milk to babies, of death to old men, and like a cow, she was expected to be compliant with every demand made of her whenever the call came. Well, not this time. She went to the door. Where are you going? She reached for the key. Your death is your own business, not mine, she said. He ran at her before she could unlock the door, and the blow, in its force, in its malice, was totally unexpected. Bitch! He shrilled. Fuck it out. Boop! Bitch! He shrieked, a hail of blows coming fast upon the first. In her stomach, the thing that wanted to kill grew a little larger. He had his fingers tangled in her hair and pulled her back into the room, shouting obscenities at her, an endless stream of them, as though he'd opened a dam full of sewer water on her. This was just another way for him to get what he wanted, she told herself. If you succumb to this, you've lost. He's just manipulating you. Still the words came, the same dirty words that had been thrown at generations of unsubmissive women. Whore, heretic, cunt, bitch, monster. Yes, she was that. Yes, she thought. Monster I am. The thought made it easy. She turned. He knew what she intended, even before she looked at him. He dropped his hands from her head. Her anger was already in her throat, coming out of her, crossing the air between them. Monster, he calls me. Monster I am. I do this for myself, not for him, never for him, for myself. He gasped as her will touched him, and the glittering eyes stopped glittering for a moment. The will to die became the will to survive. All too late, of course. And he roared. She heard answering shouts, steps, threats on the stairs. They would be in the room in a matter of moments. You are an animal, she said. No, he said, certain even now that his place was in command. You don't exist, she said, advancing on him. They'll never find the part that was Titus. Titus is gone. The rest is just... The pain was terrible. It stopped even a voice coming out from him. Or was that her again, changing his throat, his palate, his very head? She was unlocking the plates of his skull and reorganizing him. No, he wanted to say, this isn't the subtle ritual I had planned. I wanted to die folded into you. I wanted to go with my mouth clamped to yours, cooling in you as I died. This is not the way I want it. No, no, no. They were at the door, the men who kept her here, beating on it. She had no fear of them, of course, except that they might spoil her handiwork before the final touches were added to it. Someone was hurling themselves at the door now. Wood splintered and the door was flung open. The two men were both armed. They pointed their weapons at her, steady-handed. Mr. Pettifer, said the young man. In the corner of the room under the table, Pettifer's eyes shone. Mr. Pettifer? He said again, forgetting the woman. Pettifer shook his snouted head. Don't come any closer, please, he thought. The man crouched down and stared under the table at the disgusting beast that was squatting there, bloody from its transformation, but alive. She had killed his nerves. He felt no pain. He just survived. His hands knotted into paws, his legs scooped up around his back, knees broken so that he had the look of a four-legged crab. His brain exposed, his eyes lidless, lower jaw broken and swept up over his top jaw like a bulldog, ears torn off, spine snapped. Humanity, bewitched into another state. You are an animal, she'd said. It wasn't a bad facsimile of beasthood. The man with the gun gagged as he recognised fragments of his master. He stood up, greasy-chinned, and glanced around at the woman. Jaqueline shrugged. You did this? awe mingled with revulsion. She nodded. "Come, Titus," she said, clicking her fingers. The beast shook its head, sobbing. "Come, Titus," she said more forcefully. And Titus Pettifer waddled out of his hiding place, leaving a trail like a punctured meat sack. The man fired at Pettifer's remains out of sheer instinct. Anything at all, to prevent this disgusting creature from approaching him. Titus stumbled 2 steps back on his bloody paws, shook himself as if to dislodge the death in him, and failing, died. "Content?" she asked. The gunman looked up from the execution. Was the power talking to him? No. Jaqueline was staring at Pettifer's corpse, asking the question of him. Content? The gunman dropped his weapon. The other man did the same. "How did this happen?" asked the man at the door. A simple question. A child's question. "He asked," said Jaqueline. "It was all I could give him." The gunman nodded and fell to his knees. Vassie's testimony. Final part. Chance has played a worryingly large part in my romance with Jaqueline Ess. Sometimes it's seemed I've been subject to every tide that passes through the world, spun around by the merest flick of accident's wrist. Other times I've had the suspicion that she was masterminding my life, and she was the lives of 100 others, 1,000 others, arranging every fluke meeting, choreographing my victories and my defeats, escorting me blindly towards this last encounter. I found her without knowing I'd found her. That was the irony of it. I traced her first to a house in Surrey, a house that had a year previous seen the murder of one Titus Pettifer, a billionaire shot by one of his own bodyguards. In the upstairs room where the murder had taken place, all was serenity. If she had been there, they had removed any sign. But the house, now in virtual ruin, was prey to all manner of graffiti, and on the stained plaster wall of that room, someone had scrawled a woman. She was obscenely overendowed, her gaping sex blazing with what looked like lightning, and at her feet there was a creature of indeterminate species, perhaps a crab, perhaps a dog, perhaps even a man. Whatever it was, it had no power over itself. It sat in the light of her agonizing presence and counted itself among the fortunate. Looking at that wizened creature with its eyes turned up to gaze on the burning Madonna, I knew the picture was a portrait of Jaqueline. I don't know how long I stood looking at the graffiti, but I was interrupted by a man who looked to be in worse condition than me. A beard that had never been trimmed or washed, a frame so wasted I wondered how he managed to stand upright, and a smell that would not have shamed a skunk. I never knew his name, but he was, he told me, the maker of the picture on the wall. It was easy to believe that. His desperation, his hunger, his confusion were all marks of a man who had seen Jaqueline. If I was rough in my interrogation of him, I'm sure he forgave me. It was an unburdening for him to tell everything he'd seen that day that Pettifer had been killed, and to know that I believed it all. He told me his fellow bodyguard, the man who had fired the shots that had killed Pettifer, had committed suicide in prison. His life, he said, was meaningless. She had destroyed it. I gave him what reassurances I could, that she meant no harm, and that he needn't fear that she would come for him. When I told him that, he cried, more, I think, out of loss than relief. Finally, I asked him if he knew where Jaqueline was now. I left that question to the end, though it had been the most pressing inquiry, because I suppose I didn't dare hope he'd know. But my God, he did. She had not left the house immediately after the shooting of Pettifer. She had sat down with this man and talked to him quietly about his children, his tailor, his car. She'd asked him what his mother had been like, and he told her his mother had been a prostitute. Had she been happy? Jaqueline had asked. He said he didn't know. Did she ever cry? She'd ask. He said he never saw her laugh or cry in his life. and she nodded and thanked him. Later, before his suicide, the other gunman had told him Jaqueline had gone to Amsterdam. This he knew for a fact from a man called Coos. And so the circle begins to close, yes? I was in Amsterdam 7 weeks without finding a single clue to her whereabouts until yesterday evening. 7 weeks of celibacy, which is unusual for me. Listless with frustration, I went down to the red light district to find a woman. They sit there, you know, in the windows like mannequins beside pink-fringed lamps. Some have miniature dogs on their laps, some read, most just stare out at the street as if mesmerised. There were no faces there that interested me. They all seemed joyless, lightless, too much unlike her. And yet I couldn't leave. I was like a fat boy in a sweet shop. Too nauseous to buy, too gluttonous to go. Towards the middle of the night, I was spoken to out of the crowd by a young man who, on closer inspection, was not young at all, but heavily made up. He had no eyebrows, just pencil marks drawn onto his shiny skin. Cluster of gold earrings in his left ear, half-eaten peach in his white-gloved hand. Open sandals, lacquered toenails. He took hold of my sleeve proprietarily. I must have sneered at his sickening appearance, but he didn't seem at all upset by my contempt. "You look like a man of discernment," he said. I looked nothing of the kind. "You must be mistaken," I said. "No," he replied, "I am not mistaken. You are Oliver Vassie." My first thought, absurdly, was that he intended to kill me. I tried to pull away. His grip on my cuff was relentless. "You want a woman," he said. Did I hesitate enough for him to know I meant yes, though I said no? "I have a woman like no other," he went on. "She's a miracle. I know you'll want to meet her in the flesh." What made me know it was Jaqueline he was talking about? Perhaps the fact that he had known me from the crowd, as though she was up at the window somewhere, ordering her admirers to be brought to her like a diner ordering lobster from a tank. Perhaps, too, the way his eyes shone at me, meeting mine without fear, because fear, like rapture, he felt only in the presence of one creature on God's cruel earth. Could I not also see myself reflected in his perilous look? He knew Jaqueline. I had no doubt of it. He knew I was hooked because once I hesitated, he turned away from me with a mincing shrug, as if to say, "You missed your chance." "Where is she?" I said, seizing his twig-thin arm. He cocked his head down the street, and I followed him. Suddenly as witless as an idiot out of the throng. The road emptied as we walked. The red lights gave way to gloom and then to darkness. If I asked him where we were going once, I asked him a dozen times. He chose not to answer, till we reached a narrow door in a narrow house down some razor-thin street. "We're here," he announced, as though the hovel were the Palace of Versailles. Up 2 flights in the otherwise empty house there was a room with a black door. He pressed me to it. It was locked. "See," he invited. "She's inside." "It's locked," I replied. My heart was fit to burst. She was near, for certain. I knew she was near. "See," he said again, and pointed to a tiny hole in the panel of the door. I devoured the light through it, pushing my eye towards her through the tiny hole. The squalid interior was empty, except for a mattress and Jaqueline. She lay spread-eagled, her wrists and ankles bound to rough posts set in the bare floor at the 4 corners of the mattress. "Who did this?" I demanded, not taking my eye from her nakedness. "She asks," he replied. "It is her desire. She asks." She had heard my voice. She cranked up her head with some difficulty and stared directly at the door. When she looked at me, all the hairs rose on my head. I swear it, in welcome, and swayed at her command. "Oliver," she said. "Jaqueline." I pressed the word to the wood with a kiss. Her body was seething, her shaved sex opening and closing like some exquisite plant, purple and lilac and rose. "Let me in," I said to Coos. "You will not survive one night with her." "Let me in." "She is expensive," he warned. "How much do you want?" "Everything you have, the shirt off your back, your money, your jewellery. Then she is yours." I wanted to beat the door down or break his nicotine-stained fingers one by one till he gave me the key. He knew what I was thinking. "The key is hidden," he said, "and the door is strong. You must pay, Mr. Vassie. You want to pay." It was true. I wanted to pay. "You want to give me all you have ever owned, all you have ever been. You want to go to her with nothing to claim you back. I know this. It's how they all go to her." "All? Are there many?" "She is insatiable," he said without relish. It wasn't a pimp's boast, it was his pain. I saw that clearly. "I am always finding more for her, and burying them. Burying them. That, I suppose, is Ku's function. He disposes of the dead, and he will get his lacquered hands on me after tonight. He will fetch me off her when I am dry and useless to her, and find some pit, some canal, some furnace to lose me in. The thought isn't particularly attractive. And yet here I am, with all the money I could raise from selling my few remaining possessions on the table in front of me, my dignity gone, my life hanging on a thread, waiting for a pimp and a key. It's well dark now, and he's late, but I think he is obliged to come. Not for the money, he probably has few requirements beyond his heroin and his mascara. He will come to do business with me because she demands it, and he is enthralled to her every bit as much as I am. Oh, he will come. Of course he will come. Well, I think that is sufficient. That is my testimony. I have no time to reread it now. His footsteps are on the stairs. He limps. And I must go with him. This I leave to whoever finds it to use as they think fit. By morning, I shall be dead and happy. Believe it. My God, she thought, Coos has cheated me. Vassie had been outside the door. She'd felt his flesh with her mind and she'd embraced it, but Coos hadn't let him in, despite her explicit orders. Of all men, Vassie was to be allowed free access. Coos knew that. But he'd cheated her the way they'd all cheated her except Vassie. With him, perhaps, it had been love. She lay on the bed through the night, never sleeping. She seldom slept now for more than a few minutes, and only then with Coos watching her. She'd done herself harm in her sleep, mutilating herself without knowing it, waking up bleeding and screaming with every limb sprouting needles she'd made out of her own skin and muscle like a flesh cactus. It was dark again, she guessed, but it was difficult to be sure. In this heavily curtained, bare bulb-lit room, it was a perpetual day to the senses, perpetual night to the soul. She would lie, bedsores on her back, on her buttocks, listening to the far sounds of the street, sometimes dozing for a while, sometimes eating from Coos' hand, being washed, being toileted, being used. A key turned in the lock. She strained from the mattress to see who it was. The door was opened. Vassie. Oh, God, it was Vassie at last. She could see him crossing the room towards her. Oh, let this not be another memory, she prayed. Please let it be him this time, true and real. Jaqueline. He said the name of her flesh, the whole name. Jaqueline. It was him. Behind him, Coos stared between her legs, fascinated by the dance of her labia. Coo, she said, trying to smile. I bought him. He grinned at her, not looking away from her sex. A day, she whispered. I waited a day, Coos. You made me wait. What's a day to you? He said, still grinning. She didn't need the pimp any longer, not that he knew that. In his innocence, he thought Vassie was just another man she'd seduced along the way to be drained and discarded like the others. Coos believed he would be needed tomorrow. That's why he played this fatal game so artlessly. Lock the door, she suggested to him. Stay if you like. Stay, he said, leering. You mean, and watch? He watched anyway. She knew he watched through that hole he had bored in the door. She could hear him pant sometimes. But this time, let him stay forever. Carefully, he took the key from the outside of the door, closed it, slipped the key into the inside, and locked it. Even as the lock clicked, she killed him, before he could even turn around and look at her again. Nothing spectacular in his execution, she just reached into his pigeon chest and crushed his lungs. He slumped against the wood and slid down, smearing his face across the wood. Vassie didn't even turn around to see him die. She was all he ever wanted to look at again. He approached the mattress, crouched, and began to untie her ankles. The skin was chafed, the rope scabby with old blood. He worked at the knots systematically, finding a calm he thought he'd lost, a simple contentment in being here, at the end, unable to go back, and knowing that the path ahead was deep in her. When her ankles were free, he began on her wrists, interrupting her view of the ceiling as he bent over her. His voice was soft. Why did you let him do this to you? I was afraid. Of what? To move, even to live everyday agony. Yes, he understood so well that total incapacity to exist. She felt him at her side, undressing, and then laying a kiss on the sallow skin of the stomach of the body she occupied. It was marked with her workings. The skin had been stretched beyond its tolerance and was permanently crisscrossed. He lay down beside her, and the feel of his body against hers was not unpleasant. She touched his head. Her joints were stiff, the movements painful, but she wanted to draw his face up to hers. He came, smiling, into her sight, and they exchanged kisses. My God, she thought, we are together. And thinking they were together, her will was made flesh. Under his lips her features dissolved, becoming the Red Sea he dreamt of, and washing up over his face that was itself dissolving, common waters made of thought and bone. Her keen breasts pricked him like arrows. His erection, sharpened by her thought, killed her in return with his only thrust. Tangled in a wash of love, they thought themselves extinguished, and were. Outside, the hard world mourned on, the chatter of buyers and sellers continuing through the night. Eventually, indifference and fatigue claimed even the eagerest merchant. Inside and out, there was a healing silence, an end to losses and to gains.